Perfect. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for our event dedicated to fellow CIPD members and senior practitioners across the people profession. So we're looking here at HR, L&D, OD, D&I, anything that might be your specialism. We're welcoming you to join us as part of this session on how we're going to tackle a bit of diversity and inclusion in the context of everything that's happening in the market at the moment. So 2020 has been a challenging year, to say the least. We have, for both organizations, businesses, and people alike, it has been a bit of mind challenging around diversity and inclusion, which is why we thought that we bring this topic up to the light and we start discussing of how do we embed some of the diversity and inclusion elements into our people strategies. So we have seen sort of a year or 2 years of gap into gender pay gap reporting, which I know a lot of organizations have been happy to hear those news. We have seen an increased focus around race and systemic racism across organizations and society. We have seen disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 across different populations, based on race, ethnicity, or some of the social background of people. Obviously, we are during LGBT History Month at the moment, where just at the beginning of the month, CIPD has launched a report showcasing a bit of what's happening with LGBT lives in society and in the workplace. So if you haven't read that, have a look and you'll see some interesting statistics, not interesting in a good way, by the way. And obviously there's International Women's Day that's gonna come in a few days' time. So all of those elements of diversity and inclusion are happening around us. And I feel like a lot of organizations have sort of de-escalated on how they deal with diversity and inclusion. They went in that problem-solving mode and they've started patching things across their organizations of how they can keep everything together. So today's session, we're gonna elevate that a bit more. We're gonna raise the volume up on diversity and inclusion. We're gonna talk about what it means in the context of our people strategies, how we bring back that focus of how diversity and inclusion is embedded into how we look at our people, how we look at our business in a whole, and as senior professionals, how we bring it as part of our daily work. Now, if you haven't met me before, my name is Ciprian Arhire, and up until November last year, I was working for the CIPD, and hopefully I will be able to share my screen. Perfect. So up until November last year, I was working for the CIPD. Now I work for Capgemini Invent as a senior future of HR consultant. But in my spare time, I volunteer my time to support CIPD in creating such events like the one that you're attending today. So running the Fellows and Senior Practitioners Network for CIPD London, as well as the dedicated OD network. Now my passion for diversity and inclusion, and I do mean passion, has started a while ago, where I, as any other individual, had to experience a bit of the injustice of society and the workplace. Identifying as an LGBT person, I had to face some of the challenges of people back in Romania working in the corporate environment. Moving into the UK, I sort of took it as my personal mantle of making sure that people don't have to experience that sort of challenges in their workplaces again. And while I was working at CIPD, I started the LGBT network, which was the first employee resource group that CIPD has created. I was one of the founders for the D&I steering group, and part of that was to look at the internal and the external work CIPD was doing on diversity and inclusion, elevating that volume and making sure that diversity and inclusion is part of our everyday agenda across the people strategy. Now, that's a bit about my passion for diversity and inclusion, but this session is not so much about me, it's more about hearing stories from these amazing people that I managed to get together, for them to share their stories, their experience, their expertise, and trust me, they come with loads of that. So I have 3 amazing speakers that are joining us today for the session. And in no specific order, I'm going to start with Sasha Scott, who is the founder and CEO of Inclusive Group and is an expert on diversity, bias, inclusivity, and managing psychological health. She understands the commercial drivers behind reducing bias within the workplace and the critical need to promote and sustain inclusive workplace cultures in order to attract and retain talent. Now, if you read the description of this event, you will see the amazing reputation that she has as a thought leader and a practitioner around diversity and inclusion, with multiple areas that she's been published around, as well as the fact that in 2020, she was included in the Global Diversity list as a top 10 global diversity consultancies. Besides that, we have, so joining us, we have Hezi Coleman as well, who's the Global VP of People at Cigna, who's responsible for all things people, talent as part of the executive team. Now, her focus is building a world-class team of making sure working at Cigna is a great experience using the product, growing the culture of openness, collaboration, diversity, inclusion, and high performance at its heart. And last but not least, we have Asif Sadiq with us, who is the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Adidas. He's formerly Head of Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging at Telegraph Media Group, and previously led diversity and inclusion initiatives for EY Financial Services and the City of London Police. Again, multi-award winning diversity and inclusion expert with a lot of years and over 15 years of experience and proven track record of doing amazing things around diversity and inclusion. And I'm humbled to be in presence of greatness here with three amazing speakers that will be sharing their experience and their stories, and will take us on a journey to explore diversity and inclusion from completely different angles, but also how do we embed these into the people strategy as people professionals. Now, the way we're going to run this is each of the speakers that we have with us will spend about 15 to 20 minutes to share their stories and their insights. Then we're going to move into a bit of a panel discussion. So keep your questions for the panel discussion at the end. And you will be able to hear a lot of the stories and ask your most burning questions there. Now, I'm going to shut up now and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm just going to hand over to Sasha, who's going to be our first speaker for tonight, taking us on a journey talking about diversity and inclusion, psychological safety, and how we put that into the context of our people strategies. Over to you, Sasha.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm just completely privileged to be sharing the platform with my fellow speakers this evening and the CIPD. So thanks everyone for dialing in. We were having a little bit of a chuckle earlier about how amazing the attendance is, despite the fact it's 6:10 in the UK, and I suspect our audience, like us, are zoomed out. So I'm going to keep this kind of short and punchy. And you know, this is such a huge topic that I think a lot of people who've been mandated or who are interested in this whole EDI topic are dealing with overwhelm, because the last 18 months, 2 years have been absolutely extraordinary. Maybe it's best to start with a little bit about my story, because it contextualizes the way I'd like to talk to you about this today. I haven't always been involved in inclusion and diversity, far from it. I mean, I've got a background in psychology, but I spent the first half of my career, so some 12, 13 years, working in investment banking for my sins on a trading room floor. And a trading room floor is a really interesting play out for human behavior, fear and greed, most particularly playing out on that environment. And I spent a lot of time working in a sales position, massive imposter syndrome. I thought someone's going to find out really bad at maths. But I got into inclusion and diversity because 20 odd years ago, I looked over this trading room floor in the heart of London, and I calculated that about 30% of the room of 650 individuals were managers. And I couldn't work out why those people were the managers until I did a little bit of deep thinking, and I realized all those people got promoted because they're intrinsically good at what they do. And then you got promoted into a senior role. Being good at what you did in banking back then, 20 years ago, meant you made money for the bank. And I sat back and I thought, you know what? There is an absolute market and an opportunity in working with organizations to raise awareness around people, around culture, around behavior. And that's what I did. So I got into it because I felt there was a need and opportunity. And as I sit before you today in February, the need for raising awareness around people, around inclusivity, and putting that into, hearts and minds, strategy, process has never been more burning. The market's never been more volatile. And when I initially started to think about what to talk about today, I want to talk about psychological safety, but actually I think we need to start with inclusion, because you have to understand what inclusion is in order to embed it into the strategy. And one of the most fundamental learnings for me, and we've seen just shy of 1 million people, we work in 23 countries. We've built up an incredibly diverse and interesting client base. But one of the things that unites everybody, wherever they are on that journey, right at the beginning or in the middle or quite mature, is, in my opinion, you have to get inclusion right. Without inclusion, what's the point of investing in diversity? I think too much of the emphasis is on inclusive recruitment practices, which is a little bit like fixing a pipe at the front end, but then it leaks in the middle. Understanding inclusion is business critical, and inclusion is very easy to understand because inclusion unites all of us on this call. Because all of us on this call will have had examples in our life where we were not included, where we felt we did not belong. And sometimes I have conversations with HR and with SLT and EXCO about getting people to come along on the journey towards much more equality and fairness and equity. And it's hard to get people to come along until the penny drops that inclusion is about you and it's about me. And of course, this whole focus is on representation, but inclusion is the beating heart. Inclusion is the beating heart to any diversity or EDI strategy, in our opinion. And inclusion is a verb. And I'm writing a book at the moment entitled Inclusion is a Verb. It's a doing word. You understand, what does that look like? Do your leaders understand what behaviors are needed to promote, sustain, and embed an inclusive work environment? And that's your number one question, in my opinion. So inclusion is a verb, it's a doing word. And there's choice about inclusion. And it's a choice all humans have at any point of human contact with somebody else. And it's a choice that we're making all the time, even on Zoom, Teams, WebEx. And that's really important, and I'll get to that. I know personally what it's like not to be included, as you do. As a gay woman that came out much later in my life, my mid-40s, I know what it is to hide, to not be authentic, to feel I can't find my tribe, to worry about passing as straight. And I think subconsciously, probably the reason I'm involved in this field was always about trying to create a happier environment that people can just show up and be themselves and be optimized and do their best work because of inclusion. So inclusion for me is about the secret sauce that is culture within an organization. And from your HR perspectives, or whoever you are on this call, look around your organization. I don't think there ever is one culture. We strive to a culture, we write stuff on a wall, we encourage people to come along with us, but there are subcultures, and then there are cultures within cultures. And that leads me to safety, psychological safety. What does that mean? Now, we're all very obsessed, quite rightly because of COVID, with safety. We wash our hands, we anti-back, we wear a mask, and we wish for the end of lockdown. In fact, our workplaces have migrated from buildings to sitting in the palms of our disinfected hands. So psychological safety is really critical that we understand that, because we understand about the health and safety elements of working together and operating in a society and dealing with lockdown. But do we know what psychological safety is? I got a message this week from the queen of psychological safety on my Twitter, and I couldn't believe it. I had to ring up Jen, who's my MD, and I said, Jen, my week has been made. Amy Edmondson has sent me a message. Amy Edmondson has written extensively, is absolutely considered the go-to person for information about psychological safety, writing about this years and years ago from Harvard. And it's been something that's accelerated and organizations have started to really run with. And you know, a lot of the work we do with organizations is helping people understand, what does that look like behaviorally? What do I have to do to create a culture where people feel safe? Because it's as simple as this: there is no team without trust. And psychological safety is a magic ingredient to inclusion, because if people feel safe, they do their best work. How do you make people feel safe? So again, strategy, forward focusing, thinking about how do we ensure that everybody feels safe? Everybody. And of course, as humans, we're faceted, we're multifaceted, and we're talking about multivariate diversity here. I think it's very dangerous to see diversity in buckets, because none of us fit in buckets. We're all intersectionality, and different intersections meet. And if you're, you know, different intersections, for me, I'm female and I'm gay, there are a couple of intersections there that mean that, you know, I'm going to probably have to work harder to get my voice heard. But it's not only about having a voice being heard, it's who's doing the listening and helping people to understand from a leadership perspective, but across an organization, listening is really key. So one of my key messages for all of you today is never ever see EDI in isolation. They're inextricably linked. And this has really got to be behavioral. We can have policies and processes on all of this, but what we've got to do is bring it to life. And post 2020, Black Lives Matter, and all the horrific police brutality, the murder of George Floyd and many people before George Floyd, the importance of authenticity and delivery on this has never been more critical. And I really, really think that you've got to be thinking about delivery and about accountability and about authenticity. It's very easy to black out an Instagram feed, but the world and his wife, their wife, let me get my language correctly, will be questioned on delivery over the next 3 years in terms of what did you actually do? And that messaging is coming not only from your talent of today, but your talent for tomorrow, the consumers on the street, the people that buy your products, and stakeholders. So this has now thankfully been elevated to a board position for many organizations rather than a side of job. This is an HR function. I absolutely believe it's going to sit on the board and become much more prominent and very interlinked with ESG. And then finally, because I don't want to hog this, and I know I've been talking for probably over my 10 minutes, 15 minutes, getting psychological safety is inextricably linked with inclusion. But don't sleepwalk into our hybrid work environment that's just around the corner. Do not sleepwalk into that. Inclusion is going to become much more important. You know, we're working with clients on how do you manage meetings when half of the people are ringing in from home and you've got people in an office? What's that going to do to the behaviors? How do you lead and manage people when you'll have almost a 3-tiered workplace? Those people that never want to come back, those people that are desperate to come back, and those that float between the three. Getting virtual interfacing skills right is absolutely business critical. And again, at the heart of it is culture and inclusion, because our cultures are fragmented and our cultures are going to need inclusion even more. And so the behaviors that go through that have got to be, again, an absolute business priority. So, you know, thinking about the behaviors on how we lead and manage people in a hybrid world is really, really key here. So just leaving you with a couple of takeaways before I shut up. Number one, remember inclusion is a so dealing with the intersectionality and otherness is critical. Secondly, culture is your magic sauce. Get that right. And remember, it's very difficult to read a room if there is no room. So helping leaders and colleagues equip themselves with the behavioral skills to both embrace and embed inclusion is absolutely business critical, as well as quite fundamentally the right thing to do. So that's my little talk. I'll be quiet now, but thank you for listening.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sasha. That was, we had a few seconds of connection issue there, but we picked up all of the messages. So thank you very much for that. It was quite interesting to see that perspective from psychological safety as well into the workplace and your thoughts around it. So thank you very much for sharing. Now, if you have any questions for Sasha or any of the other panelists, feel free to put them in the chat for me, and I'm going to pick them up at the end. Now we're just going to ask Asif if he wants to step into the light and share with us his insights for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and hi everyone. I recognize a lot of names, so hi, and really great to see you here, and great to be on this panel with some amazing speakers as well. I was thinking about what to say, and some of you probably heard me speak before, so I'll try my best to try to cover my thoughts over, I think, what has been a critical 12 months, and what direction and what's changed in D&I, and what we really need to do going forward in this space. And something I talk a lot about is, in discussions recently has been, are we really making the change that we need to in this space? And where are the barriers? Where's the challenges? And where are the opportunities? And one of the things many of you have probably seen, every organization is sort of running towards hiring a head of D&I, a global head of D&I, trying to put things in place in order to really make change happen. And I think what's missing with a lot of this is a true evaluation of what is necessary, what is innovative, and what's the real change that people are asking for that needs to happen. And I think to achieve that, one of the big questions we must all ask ourselves is, are we actually approaching the whole topic of D&I in the right way? And really to break that down, the first concept is this notion of diversity, right? So, every time I speak, and I've been saying this for years, we talk about diversity, and what comes to mind, or what usually ends up happening, is we get these amazing thoughts around boxes. And, everyone has to be squeezed into a box to represent a particular characteristic, whether that be gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation. And, organizations pick a box for you and squeeze you into that box, and then it's assigned to you for the rest of your career. No one is a box. The amount of frustration I have with that concept of being identified by either what you see or the box that you pick for me. Everyone's unique. Everyone has their own identity. Intersectionality means there's multiple layers to who we are. Yet we are driven towards these boxes. And then, the piece which really takes me back is the concept of our needs are based on these boxes. So the amount of times I hear, we need to give women more confidence. We'll put them all on a program to give them more confidence. Well, actually, that is not true. Or you hear, we'll put BME. Oh, by the way, I'll talk about the phrase BME in itself, which I don't necessarily think is the right phrase, because it's a large group of people, Black minority ethnic, Black Asian minority ethnic, can't group us together. Individual needs, different experiences, and different challenges. But the problem is we group people together and then assume their needs are similar. And then we put together a program that will hopefully, change our workplace. It's not the way it works. We don't do that for any other group. We don't do that for the majority within our workforce. Why do we do it for different groups or different dimensions of diversity? So I think that firstly needs to change. There needs to be a reevaluation of how do we capture people's authentic identities, their unique identities, and then move into this space of creating a sense of belonging for them. What does belonging mean? Different generations. One of the biggest things I've learned in my time at Adidas is, having such a young workforce is understanding that for them, they want purpose alongside everything else. So they're not just going to join a brand or an organization. When I 20 years ago started my own journey, I just wanted a job. That was the only thing I was looking for. Today, young people want an organization that values D&I, that truly understands it, that embeds it across the business, not just gives it lip service or looks at it from one angle. So really, really important that we change this whole notion around what diversity means. And on a very personal sort of level, to give you an example, I get a lot of times people talk to me about race as they perceive me to be, of course, from a different ethnicity. Now, to be very honest with you, race has been a challenge in my life, can be a challenge, but I was born this color. It hasn't changed over the 40 odd years that I've been alive. But my biggest challenge right now is the fact that I've got a young family. I've got a 5-year-old and I've got a 3-year-old. Huge challenge. No one ever speaks to me about that because it's not visible. It's not something people see. But to really identify my needs from a D&I perspective, you need to value those elements as well. So really important for us to really truly understand this notion of what we mean by diversity and build in different elements of diversity and those authentic identities. And then inclusion, the big piece that we're all working towards. Yeah, it's great. We need to create inclusion. We need to have teams that are more inclusive. But do we truly understand? Do teams within organizations understand what we mean by inclusion? Is it just about giving someone a seat at the table? Or is it more than that? And my challenge is, it's much more than that, because the fact that I'm part of something doesn't automatically mean I can be myself. I can be included in a meeting and be the only person who's different. And then I have to adapt to the group thinking. I have to act like everyone else. I have to behave in a way that's seen as appropriate within that environment. That's not reaping the benefits of having me as someone being diverse within that team. So we truly have to understand what we mean by diversity and inclusion. And then, to this notion of belonging, I think belonging is a huge piece, creating that psychological safety, having trust within a team and being valued for who you are. But to achieve that, what do we do? And there's sort of like 3-4 principles which I think are really important. So the first one is, we tend to, within organizations, put a plaster on a plaster. We don't identify what the problem is, what the root cause of an issue, a challenge is. We just, bring in fancy programs, fancy campaigns, and hope that it will solve our D&I problems. But what we need to do is really go back to what is the problem? Where is the challenge? Where's the system actually broken? And if I put that into perspective through an example, so when we look at recruitment, we spend thousands of pounds on, hey, we need to attract more diversity, so we'll do a big campaign on diversity recruitment, or we'll put an ad in a particular paper, or whatever it is. Is that where the challenge is, or is it somewhere in your system? What we need to do is look at the whole recruitment process from start to finish, break it down, look at where the challenges lie. Is it attraction? Is it the assessment? Is it where we are paper sifting CVs? Is it interview stage? Is it final interview stage? Is it offer that's not right? What are we doing wrong? And unless we challenge these processes and break them down, I mean, one of the things I still find really shocking is the amount of times interviewers ask people for their current salary. Why is that relevant? And I know a lot of organizations here, do that, but it's something we need to change. We continue to then build in processes that create or don't create that sense of belonging, or don't truly value the diversity and inclusion we're bringing into an organization. We know from statistical evidence, women and those from minority backgrounds are paid less than their counterparts. But what we do is we continue that vicious circle. And then, what's the worst? The worst thing is when you join an organization and you sit next to someone and you realize that you're at the same grade doing the same job and they're getting £20,000 more than you. So why not just eliminate that process? And also this whole piece of asking, looking at cultural fit. How many times, do we still need cultural fit? We need to start looking at cultural add. Who's going to add to what we do? Who's going to bring a different perspective into our workplace? But to do that, we need to think differently. And to Sasha's point, we're so good at the recruitment stage. Even when it comes to, we will get the diversity in. But then once they're in, we want them to be like us. You can't disrupt, you can't challenge our processes. So we really need to start to understand what we really want and disrupt the processes that limit inclusion, limit diversity from actually staying with us longer. We must also bring everyone into the conversation. The truth is, and this is probably one of those difficult conversations, and I know from speaking to so many people that it's happening. There's groups of people now who think that diversity is missing them, or diversity is not about them. It used to be the case even a couple of years back. A lot of straight white men within organizations thought they've got no opportunity, and they're not going to succeed in their career, which is not a fact, but it was a perception they held. The truth is, diversity requires each and every person to understand why we're doing it, what journey we're on, and to understand that it's a critical thing for our organizations, for our survival. It's not a nice thing to do anymore. Organizations who get D&I right are more profitable, have better engagement with their customers. The ones who get it wrong risk reputational risk so many other challenges. So we must make sure that everyone's brought on board and everyone understands it. And that requires a change in how leaders approach situations. The amount of times in my career, I've had leaders put people who look like me in a room and tell us how great we are. If I had a pound for every time, I'd be a millionaire. What I need is a leader to stand up and tell everyone why they think it's important to have people like me or people of other, diversity elements. If we believe in it, tell everyone so everyone understands the journey an organization is going on. It is hugely important. And also then to understand the informal processes. And I think in HR, this is one of the big things. We correct a lot of formal processes. We put things in place. We put systems in place that can help and support fairness, equity, equality, whatever way we want to look at it. However, what about the informal processes? What about the fact that you will put processes that are fair, but the first time a young man from a lower socioeconomic background comes to your office, it's the first time they're actually in the City of London, if your office is in the City of London. First time they're coming into this big building, it's hugely difficult. I still remember when I joined EY, the first time I walked into their building, it was scary. It was this posh building. You get this person giving you directions to take a seat and help yourself to coffee. And it's this, coffee machine, which, by the way, I guarantee you no one knows how to operate because I never figured it out. But it's quite, it makes you quite uneasy. But those who are privileged, their uncle works for EY or their, next door neighbor does. So they've had that visit the week before. How do we correct those systems? How do we correct the other advantages that people have when we come to promotion processes and someone knows someone, so they send someone an email to say, hey, so-and-so is really good. Not everyone has that sponsorship. Not people, usually people from underrepresented groups don't have that. So how do we create more processes to support the informal processes? The networking, we all know networking is such a big part of how we progress within the workplace or even in more broadly in our careers. How do we create those processes for those who don't have those opportunities? Because networking, we know, traditionally exists through certain environments, and it requires certain things which others are not comfortable doing, like drinking and so on. So there's so many different elements to this, and I notice my time's almost at an end. And as you know, I can talk for England, but I think that the big thing is, there's a lot of change in the last 12 months. What is critical now is how we bring about sustainable change. These actions, and we're just as guilty. We've had actions in the past that we are committing to. Actions get done, filed away, and then we can forget about it. What are the sustainable things we are implementing that are going to be really creating that progress over the next 3, 5, 10 years? We're not going to solve the D&I problems in a day. You know, a lot of people asked me last year within our organization, our leadership's all white. When's that going to change? 100% needs to change. It can't change overnight, but what I don't want is in 5 years to be having the same conversation. So I need to put in place systems, processes, and really create an environment that within 5 years, we have that change that we need to see. Now, many of you might think, well, 5 years is a long time. It is. It is hugely a long time. Ideally, we want to do it much quicker. But I want to make sure that, you know, I don't sit around thinking, well, it's not a problem or a challenge that I can solve. And then in 5 years, we're still where we are now. So really important that we make the shift, we make the change. We really, you know, look at the sustainable change, and we support and understand equality is not the way, equity is important. And this is my last point, I promise, that we need to acknowledge there are groups that have, you know, traditionally have been underrepresented. We haven't created equity for every group in the same way, and that's fine. But you know what? Progress in diversity for one element or area of diversity should be progress for every other area. So how we approach it within an organization, the key thing is that we create that that inclusion. So yes, we might be doing it to create race equality or, you know, equality for a particular group. But how can we approach the situation in a more inclusive way to ensure that while we're at this process, we correct it for other groups as well? But we need to create equity. Every group is not treated the same, and that's the reality of the world that we live in. But we can and will, within the workplace, create that equity and equality for everyone. I'll stop there because I've gone over my time.
Thank you very much, Asif. There's been a lot of insight in there, and I know people have been blowing up the chat with different questions, but also different comments of where are the areas where they agree with what you've said, and some examples of that work happening in organizations. So thank you very much for sharing that. Now we're going to quickly move to Hassie and allow her to come in and fill in the next 20 minutes with her insight and her expertise in this field. And then we're going to pick up questions. So if you have any questions either for any of the three speakers we have tonight, feel free to put it in the chat. You can message me directly, or you can message everybody. It doesn't really matter. So over to you, Hassie.
Thanks so much. And wow, what incredible speakers we've had so far. So I want to focus really, I guess, from an HR perspective, on driving an intersectional approach in your D&I and in your people strategy. I'm going to try and make this quite practical and hopefully give you some things that you can think about actually implementing yourselves from my own experience. My experience, I started off my life in the corporate world. I used to work for Mercer, for British Gas, Centrica. I got into startups via a Centrica subsidiary called Hive. It's an Internet of Things connected app, control your heating on your smartphone. Since then, worked in tech for a while, most recently scaled Starling Bank from about 25 employees, pre-banking license through maturity. And now I'm at Sedna, which is a team collaboration software company. Think Team Inbox, but with more collaboration, visibility, and transparency. Bring email down by about 95%. But that's not what today's talk is about. Today's talk is about, through that experience, actually, hopefully sharing some of my learnings around D&I. Can I also say, actually, it is so refreshing that we're at a point where actually I feel like I don't have to start this talk by really banging the drum of the commercial value of D&I, and you know, it's not just the right thing to do, there's great financial impact down the line, and so on. Actually, I have to say, just the fact that you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to assume we probably all know that already, although to refresh, I did look up some stats as I was preparing for this, and it's frankly very disappointing. I think in Silicon Valley, less than 1% of leaders are women of colour. In the UK, more close to home, in the FTSE 100, 5% of CEOs are female. None of them are women of colour, as far as I'm aware. So we've got a long way to go. And as everybody so far has said, you know, I mean, if not now, the time is right. But anyway, on the subject then of D&I, I think I find the acronym D&I, I find it the wrong way around. It's alphabetical, yes, but you know, as Asif and as Sasha have said, actually inclusion really needs to come first. In my opinion, it is so much more important. It's about welcoming, accepting people as their whole selves. Diversity then is something of a second order effect. It's actually kind of a virtuous cycle. If you have an inclusive company and culture, then diversity follows. You know, you can have a diverse workforce as you like, if on paper, but if people from underrepresented minority groups don't feel actively welcomed, not just tolerated, but actually actively accepted and welcomed, you're going to have real engagement, morale, retention problems if you're essentially mirroring the wider world with all of the risks for people from underrepresented groups, such as bias, microaggressions, even discrimination, worst case. Also, it's going to make life much harder to hire because you're really shutting yourself down from a large section of the talent pool. And also because nobody really wants to feel like, you know, the token, the diversity hire. So diversity without inclusion, I think it really runs a risk of becoming very tokenistic. You're, you know, exactly as a Sif said, you're looking at people, you're putting people into boxes. You're kind of, I think the risk is that you try to break it down too narrowly into these little demographic boxes, which I don't think is helpful. But as an example of like how that actually plays out then in reality, so a really common D&I initiative, for example, employee resource groups, that could be, for example, you might have a support group for parents and carers, for LGBT staff, for BAME staff, for disabled employees, whatever the groups are that are most relevant, you know, for your populations. I mean, my personal bugbear, I have a slight concern about whether that is intrinsically othering in itself. But that aside, again, you're putting people or asking people to self-select really neatly into these little diversity boxes and along really narrow axes, which I think, I mean, I'm working in tech, you know, we love to talk about women in tech. I'll hold my hand up to that. I've definitely fallen into that trap too, but it's too narrow. Gender is just, it's one spoke on a much bigger wheel. Like you can have a gender balance that looks good on paper, but actually if all of your female staff are either in the lowest or most junior positions in the company, or have a similar sort of background, educational, socioeconomic, etc., you're not really reflecting the world or your customer base, and you're missing out on some really valuable perspectives. So we talk a lot about authenticity, we talk a lot about bringing your whole self to work, but I think this is so important to morale, to engagement. Our employees who don't fit this kind of Western professional straight white male pattern actively welcomed, respected, included, etc. Intersectionality then, I think, and for me, I have to say I'm so excited that the conversation is moving into talking about intersectionality, because I think it's really important to actually go that step further, understand people's experience in full. If we consider a cis woman and a transgender woman, for example, the cis woman may be at risk of discrimination, of bias. She may not have access to opportunity, I don't know, because of her gender. But the transgender woman has all of those same problems, as well as having a much higher risk to her actual physical safety. Or a topical example at the minute, in the pandemic, in current times, somebody who is at high risk for COVID due to an underlying health condition, such as myself, or a young LGBT person who maybe has moved back home to an unsupportive family home where they can't be out, or somebody who is now homeschooling their children. These people might have a lot in common, but actually they're going to have such different experiences of the last 12 months. And actually that could apply, all those three things could apply to the same person. So how then do you support somebody? And how do we really incorporate this kind of intersectional approach to D&I into a people strategy? I wanted to just take a minute, I guess, to then talk practically. I hope we all understand kind of the problem. What do we do about it? I think the first thing that is really important to do is to understand the problem, first of all. I think it's really important to actually understand, measure and understand the data. What are the kind of intersections of diversity that are relevant in your population? I'm going to assume chances are most people probably have some form of metric or diversity survey or similar in their business. Are you able to actually highlight these nuances? And then what do you do with that? Chances are you probably have an engagement survey. Are you actually able to see, for example, if people in different demographics or intersections of demographics are reporting a different experience of working in your business. Can you actually tune this quite subtly to find that out? And then I think about reviewing your working practices. I forget who it was now. Somebody earlier actually spoke about the kind of informal practices, and I think that's where it's really important. I'm sure that we've already probably considered policies and procedures, but then how that is actually implemented in the wild, I think is so critical. So the examples of progression, promotion that we've heard about tonight, it's although your kind of policy might be as neutral and equitable as you might like, if in reality, is there actually a trend of a certain type of person that maybe does well in a business? Why is that? Even what might seem like a little thing, like how people can get time off or flexible working. Can you take days off for cultural or religious reasons, for childcare, for elder care, for no reason at all? Childcare, I mean, that's a bit of an obvious one at the minute, right? In the pandemic, and especially with the news that about schools, when kids are going to be going back to school coming up in the next couple of months. But I think in reality, though, there is still this kind of subconscious assumption that childcare is something that affects women, which then also has a knock-on effect for the women, who might have the assumption that they're the ones that are going to pick up the burden, but also for the men, who, unless it's really kind of obviously acceptable, or it's almost role modeled, might feel they might feel like actually it's not maybe acceptable for them to take time off for childcare type reasons subconsciously, but it still has an effect. I think Asif talked about culture, and I'm going to talk about culture ad in a minute. I'm so happy that you brought that up. That's something I could talk about for hours. But I think in terms of culture, again, one of the ways I like to think about it is behavioral, really. It's kind of the behaviors or actions which are actively promoted, encouraged, recognized in the business. But then on the flip side, also the lowest form or standard of behavior that's acceptable. I think that is something that is really actually powerfully shapes your culture, I think, more than you maybe always realize. And that can be really, really little things. I'm so relieved, frankly, that I've not in years had somebody try to justify an offensive comment as, oh, it's just a joke, it's just banter. Touch wood, actually, I'll be very happy if I never hear that again. But that's a really subtle one where, especially those kind of borderline cases, it's a really great opportunity to educate, to actually help people to understand. It's not about punishment. It's not about disciplinary action necessarily. I mean, it might be. It depends on the situation. But it's actually the important thing really is education, actually helping those people understand, why that wasn't received well, why it's not appropriate, which actually for your staff from underrepresented minority groups, also seeing the fact of what is tolerated and what is not, and the fact that you actually follow up on it is really, really powerful. Okay, so know what we're dealing with, got the kind of basics or the baseline of your working practices, policies, procedures, etc. Let's go one step further then, actively supporting employees. I was probably a little bit harsh on the ERGs actually before, certainly valuable. My concern really is more around the risk if boundaries are drawn a bit too narrowly. But let's take it in a different direction then. And again, this is something that is going to depend entirely on your populations. So this is not one size fits all. I'm just giving examples to spark ideas. If we take parents and carers then as one group, a group that we know has been, in many cases, hit quite hard by the pandemic, having quite a hard time, could the disability group and the parents and carers group potentially do a joint support on mental health for parents and carers? Is the parents and carers group set up to support LGBT parents who might face a different path into parenthood? They might be looking at adoption, surrogacy, etc. Also, I think something really important to consider is the accessibility as well of these events and support initiatives. As much as I really wish that I could actually be in a room speaking with you all, and it's certainly very odd to be sat in my little home office, kind of speaking to a bunch of little squares. Actually, the fact that this video is being recorded is in itself very, very accessible. For people that have a mobility issue, that maybe would find it hard to travel to an event. for people, again, parents, carers, people that maybe have something going on in the evening that they would find hard to be out of the home for. Yeah, so excuse me, so that's actually, in many ways, this is actually very accessible. Similarly with things like socials, something that I came across was Friday night drinks. It's a classic, right? I mean, in office days. But as much as drinking culture obviously being difficult and not very accessible to large populations anyway, something that I hadn't really thought of until it was pointed out to me was actually that also you're excluding any Jewish people you have in your population because it's the Sabbath, so they can't come out for a social on a Friday. So I think actually just taking a slightly different take on it of actually the kind of intersections, not just of oppression, microaggressions, etc., but actually also, I guess, allyship and how these groups actually have a lot in common and how you as an employer can, I guess, help to foster that intersectional approach to support, I think is something very important. I am going to touch on recruitment because I think although it's not the be all and end all, I think it certainly is an important facet regarding D&I. I mean, after all, it's your opportunity to bring new people into the business. Again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. Have a serious think about your processes. It's really well documented, for example, and I'm going to make some big generalizations now, but there is a lot actually of research that men and women have different internal thresholds for when they'll apply for a job. I think for men, if they meet something like 50% of the criteria, then in the job application, then they'll be more likely to apply. Whereas for women, it's more like 85%. So actually, if you're kind of writing a wish list under the guise of requirements, are you actually excluding quite a large swathe of the population? Similarly, I mean, practically every job out there says it needs a bachelor's degree or a similar undergrad. Do you really? Is relevant experience not maybe more important? Something to think about. Likewise, how you recognize different qualifications. I was having this conversation the other day with a colleague who studied in France. So their undergraduate degree is a license. It's not a bachelor's degree. But how would you recognize that if you didn't necessarily know it? Similarly, actually, another really interesting study is around gender neutral language, which there's a lot of evidence available that gender neutral language attracts a wide range of applicants, which is my experience as well. So what that means is that this kind of what the study terms masculine language, which is things like, ninjas and rock stars and gonna smash your targets, very like aggressive, powerful type language, which they coded as masculine, is more like neutral, attractive to male candidates, but less attractive to female candidates. Whereas slightly softer language that's more supportive, more inclusive, more welcoming, talking about like the team, the opportunities available to progress, etc., is just as attractive to male candidates, but is also just as attractive to female candidates. So it's really easy to accidentally exclude a whole bunch of people from wanting to apply to your job that you actually really want to hear from. We're doing an experiment at the moment, and it's too early to really say, but we're doing an experiment where for one of our roles, it's blind hiring. We're anonymizing all applications, but we're not asking for a CV. We're just asking people to answer some questions relevant to their experience, relevant to the role. The hope being that by not having a name, not having an educational background, there's much less chance of unconscious bias creeping in because you're just assessing based on the things that are most relevant for the role itself. So it's too early to say. We only put the job ad up about a week ago. Early results are good, but I'll come back on that one. So that's I just wanted to give a quick kind of rundown around the things that I've kind of observed or learned throughout my career in a variety of different companies. I think I've been really lucky, and also I'm very proud to have worked in and built some teams and organizations that are very inclusive throughout my career, and also in my consulting work. So I wanted to, I mean, Sedna is small, we're only about 70 people, but actually the leadership team and all levels are 40% female. Leadership team is also about 40% BAME. And, I'm not going to be happy, of course, until that actually reflects the world and the wider population. But it's not a bad start given the industry that we're in. And we achieved this basically exactly as I've just described, ensuring that we're a really inclusive employer, expanding our talent pool, hiring the best candidate for the job, and really actually taking a hard look at kind of a first principles approach to how we're actually operating as a business. So yeah, that would be, if I could to summarize, that's those are the things that I would really recommend doing. And yeah, it's very strange to a little group of boxes, but thank you so much. It's I think I've definitely run out of time now. I could talk about this for hours, but I am actually gonna shush. Let's move on to questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Hesse. I'm sure everybody who's, and the conversation keeps going as well. So everybody's very passionate about this topic, but also how do we solve some of these challenges that we face in organizations? How do we elevate the conversation and we convince businesses and business leaders that this is the right way of doing things, not just good for business or the business case for it, but actually how do we drive systemic change in that area? So I'm just going to ask all my panelists to come back on the screen. So Sasha, if you can join us back as well. Thank you very much. And we've already received a lot of questions, so keep them coming. I'm going to pick the ones that I've already mapped and ready to go. And then as people are answering the questions, I'm just going to go through the chat again to make sure that I'm not missing anything. So I think the first question that I want to address is to all of you, and it's one that came from Jenny, but I'm rephrasing a little bit. So we've seen a lot of sort of diversity and inclusion being constantly almost like an organizational priority, but never urgent enough to be actually addressed and tackled and invested properly in. In the last year, we have seen a bit of a shift in there, but not to the amount of actually we're driving systemic change across multiple organizations, across society in this area. So the question is, what is your advice for people professionals to do to gain traction in the area of diversity and inclusion, whether it's to convince business leaders, whether it's the boards of organizations? How do you suggest they will use different stats or different solutions to drive traction in that area? Sasha, do you want to go first? You look like you're ready.
Oh, okay. So I think it's a brilliant question that there's never one answer, right? I would say if you want to influence other people and get traction and get commitment, you've got to do the analysis on who you're talking to. And I'd always say have several cards in your deck, because some people will be motivated because they've never touched diversity, and then their teenager over the kitchen table says that they're gay, and suddenly it's like, whoa, this is in my house. So there's an emotional connection. Some people will be motivated by the fact that you need to demonstrate the robust business case behind why I would do this, and where are the numbers and what's the stats. It's very difficult to argue with data. And then other people will be motivated by the fact that, well, you don't need, I think need and must and should are terrible words. I think it would be advisable to identify key stakeholders and influencers, and having a direct line into the board is really helpful if that's your business structure. So there's just some ideas from me. I'm sure my esteemed panelists will have loads of others.
Thank you very much. Hesse, do you want to?
Sure.
Just jump straight in. So keen. But yeah, I mean, 100% agree with Sasha. I think something that has been so heartening to me, even just over the last 5 years or so, kind of 5-10 years, is the number of these meetings that I've gone into armed to the teeth with data, like ready to pitch my case. And the answer is, yes, we want to do this. I don't know where to start, help. It's actually been so heartening to me, the number of times that I think people have come around to understanding the moral and commercial value of actually D&I generally. But I think especially when you're kind of starting from the beginning, it's hard and people don't know what to do and they feel awkward about it. And what if I say the wrong thing? So I think I 100% agree with Sasha. It definitely doesn't hurt to be prepared at all, and to think about who you're kind of presenting to. But just to give a counterpoint from my experience of that, that actually I found it really heartening that I'm so often pushing at an open door.
Thank you very much, Hesse. Asif?
So I mean, I of course agree with both Sasha and Hesse as well. But I'll give a different take on this. I don't believe it's my responsibility to go around telling the business, or, you know, I've not got this box full of D&I tricks that I can hand out to every single leader in every single part of our business where they want one. D&I is everyone's responsibility. They need to look at it from their angle. I'm not going to give them the benefit of, you know, here's the one thing they can do, tick it off, and then, you know, to my point earlier, file it off for the rest of the year. They don't need to worry about it. The conversation needs to be around, what are they going to do around D&I? I'm a consultant to the business. I mean, of course, I'm employed by the business, but my role is just to guide you and support you. That the real question is, what is that leader? What is that department? What is advertising going to do? What's finance going to do? What's marketing going to do? What's product creation going to do for D&I? Not what Asif's going to do for D&I for the organization. Those days are long gone. That goes back to the box ticking D&I. And actually, that's one of the big challenges, I think, going into this space in the next couple of years, because a lot of organizations, as many of you are aware, are, you know, hiring in the D&I leaders, and we're going to go back into the box ticking, you know, D&I elements. You know, the whole, we'll do an hour's unconscious bias workshop. We'll capture some data. We'll do a development program for women into leadership, and, you know, all those traditional things that we've done. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not against any of those things, but I think it's beyond that conversation if you really want to make change. Leaders have to look at it from their business perspective. What are they going to do? Where's the impact points? Because a universal approach to D&I in any organization doesn't bring about change.
Thank you very much, Asif. Now, reflecting on that, as a D&I person that you're coming into an organization, the first few things that you're looking is to create an analysis of where the organization is on a maturity level of diversity and inclusion, or maturity of thinking, or appetite for change and driving that. What are some of the key questions you would ask either business leaders or across the organizations to assess that level of maturity? Or what would you look like? Would you look at, to assess that level of maturity?
So I'll go first this time, so we can work together. I think it's an analysis of understanding where the organization is, right? One of the things I'm, again, quite against at the moment is this competition piece we get into. You know, when you go into an organization, the question is, what is our competitor doing? I couldn't care less what the competitor is doing, because all that ends up doing is we're the best of a bad bunch. We're not here to look at what our competitors are doing. We're here to look at what change we need to embed, what we need to do. So the question should be, where are we on our journey? Data is important. I think it was mentioned earlier. Data is hugely important, but data needs to be looked at much better. The problem with data is we look at it in isolation, we go back to the boxes. We look at it from a gender, BME perspective, disability, and so on, sexual orientation. We need to break it down. You know, what do we look at data around if we have a Black female who has a disability and is bisexual? What data do we have on that? We don't. Do we look at someone who has 2 or 3 elements of data? We don't. And the problem with that is we're not looking at it in the right way. Race and ethnicity, we group it together, BME, BAME, right? We put targets in organizations around, we need to hire 30% BAME, right? And in financial services, this was a big thing. You know, 30% of our new recruits will be BAME. When you break it down, 27% of the 30% are South Asian, 3% or less than 3% are Black. Because you're not looking at, and we used to pat each other on the back, by the way, to say we're doing a great job. You know, we're doing the 30% BAME recruitment. We're not, because we're not breaking it down to understand. Same goes for gender, same goes for LGBTQ plus and so on. Are we looking at the different strands? Are we breaking it down to see where the challenges lie? So data, and also, you know, the questions around where the organization is, where they need to go. And there isn't a right starting point, by the way. The most advanced organizations still have work to do, and the ones who've not done anything still have work to do. It's really understanding what stage and what steps need to be taken to really advance change.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Sasha, Hesse, anything else to add?
Absolutely agree with you, Asif. I think Yeah, I think to your question originally, Chip, of the kind of, what questions would you ask specifically to senior leadership, to the ExCo, etc., to understand the current situation, which I think, as you said as well, is you have to kind of start from where you are today, and you have to understand where you are today to do that. I think I would actually take a very slightly different approach, in as far as I think that often there's a little bit of a disconnect, and we see this with things like engagement surveys a lot. There's a little bit of a disconnect with how management see the business and how the business is doing, and how people at different levels see progress and how they're doing. So as much as, yes, of course, SLT, etc., have to be a big part of your understanding of how the business is doing, I think you need to take a bit of a broader view as well of the wider business, to really, as you're kind of doing that research, as you're digging into the experience of employees, well, how better to find out than asking the employees, asking the people kind of on the shop floor, asking the people that are doing the job day to day, how they experience what the company is doing, and progress that's been made or not on these matters.
And I just say that I completely agree with both what both speakers have said, 100%. And I also just to say that data collection analysis is going to get a whole lot more complicated because of this whole overlay with GDPR, etc., particularly for global organizations. I think you're going to see a lot of movement that lawyers are far more involved in this than diversity consultants. And I just think, watch that train come, because that's coming around the collection of data. I'm also a big fan of sentiment analysis, and to back up what as he said, that it's, what's your lived experience around here? What does that look and feel like? And I absolutely agree. Let's stop benchmarking against each other, and let's just try and do the best we can, rather than this being a league table and almost a kind of fueling an awards culture around that. Let's just get on and do the work.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Now, the next question is related to sort of the progress on diversity and inclusion. So if we look at the field of diversity and inclusion, it started from representation and making sure we have a mix of people in US, very much focused around Black people being present in the organization. Then you moved into tolerance, and obviously that's a very problematic area of asking for tolerance, which just saying the word makes my skin crawl a little bit. Then we started tackling equality and talking about equality instead of tolerance. And now the conversation is moving more towards equity, and it has been for the past 10 years in looking into equity as a predecessor of inclusion and belonging. From your perspective, where do you think the field of diversity and inclusion will be moving next?
I'll just jump in quickly and then I'll be quiet. Like, I think that the massive preoccupation will be on how you lead and manage in a hybrid environment. And I think that that's going to be really, really key. So that's my 5 pence worth.
Thank you, Sasha.
I think just to add to that, I think it will be about unique identities and people being their authentic self. I think this predetermined what we need to do for people is going to shift, and we're going to start valuing unique identities. And just a very quick point around, and value, the value add. I think I worry that we'll initially see a slight slump in understanding the benefits of diversity. But we need to really, I think in the future it would be about understanding it's a value add. You're not doing me a favor by employing me. I'm doing you a favor by joining your company. That's the way we need to get to.
Yes. Thank you. Hetty?
Yeah, I think one day, a long way, I guess, from here. But one day, I hope that we are no longer having the diversity conversation. Not because we're sweeping it under the rug, not because we're ignoring it, but because it's such a norm of day-to-day life and work that we no longer have to talk about it as something, a special category to talk about. I think that in terms of that's probably a ways off, but we can all do our best to help get there. I think that I mean I agree with both of our other speakers. I think in the near term future, I think Sasha is absolutely spot on that I think this hybrid workforce has a real risk in it of becoming a bit of a them and us, and I think that there's actually being able to open up a hybrid or a remote workforce has some real diversity benefits to a company, because you can really open up your talent pools. But it has some real inclusion risks as well, not from a D&I inclusion perspective exclusively, but also just from a, if you're not in the office, are you forgotten about? You don't have FaceTime, and the presenteeism creeps back in is the risk. So I think that's going to be a near term, a really big priority for all of us, really.
Yeah, and to that advances of technology and this hyper-personalized workplace where we're trying to support everyone's identity, circumstances, and background will just raise more questions around diversity and inclusion. I think there was a comment in the chat earlier that it seems a bit overwhelming in all of these things that you're trying to do. And I think as an HR professional, you need to be ready to be challenged, but not challenging in the fact that someone wants to get your job, but challenge for the sake of improving. So we're talking about sort of like flexible holidays. So you can take your holidays based on the religion and belief that you belong to, not necessarily around the corporate policy of where you need to take Christmas holiday. And we're talking about creating those flexibilities and allowing to have those open conversations with employees, because they will tell you what they need. You just, as an HR professional, need to tune into the conversation, allow that conversation to flourish and support the development of it. And that will just flourish and give you the advice that you actually need to implement some of these things. Now, the next question is about sort of this multi-tiered or multi-level strategies. So you have the people strategy, you have the business strategy, you have a learning strategy, you have a change strategy. Where do you see sort of the interdependencies between the D&I strategy and the people strategy, and how close, and the business strategy, actually, to be honest, and how close together do these need to be the same? They need to be synchronized, they need to feed from each other. Where do you see this? How do you see this happening?
So with the strategy piece, just before I go on to that, with the piece around when you're talking about flexible holidays and flexible offerings, we need to design things in an inclusive way. What we do is we design for one group of people. I'll give you a prime example. I'm sorry, I'm going a bit off the question here, but when you look at emergency backup care, which was a thing, right? It was, if you were a parent, you got emergency backup care. A lot of companies offered it, which was great if you were a parent. Now, when we're looking at things like that, how do we create them to be more inclusive? So one of the things I did in my last organization is our emergency backup care. I then said it should also cover if you've got elderly care. It should also cover if your partner needs support, you need that backup care. So it should, how do we design things more inclusively? Hot desking, this big concept which was supposed to work for everyone. We know not everyone is the same. So why do we design things in a way without thinking inclusion? If you think inclusion first, then it reduces your workload, because you're not redesigning, reinventing, recreating another thing on top of another. Think with an inclusive lens. Office spaces. Think inclusion. Don't think, well, actually, if someone's in a wheelchair, how will they access it? Think, how can anyone access it? Think more broadly. So that was my point on that. And then just on the strategy piece, we've just done our 2025 strategy. And I was part of the leadership team that looked at the strategy. D&I, you'll be interested, well, the interesting thing is, it's not a part of the strategy, it's the whole strategy. So it's no longer this separate thing that we do. However, within that, there's some double down efforts that we acknowledge we need to do. Because I know that, we're not where we are, that I can just put it as part of everything and no one will function on it. So we've doubled down on certain elements, but every single element of the strategy touches D&I. And then the people strategy automatically results in that being embedded into that. Our business strategy has it embedded in, our consumer strategy has it embedded in, because it's from the top strategy, it's part of everything.
Yeah, 100%. And to your point earlier, again, I mean, D&I not an HR initiative. It's not a marketing initiative. Pat ourselves on the back, look how good we are compared to our competitors, our industry, etc. It's actually everybody's problem. And I think that you're absolutely right in terms of it's so fundamental to underpinning the entire business strategy that I think those things also tie together, right? Like, yes, it has to be really woven into everything, but also it has to be everybody's problem. It's not a HR OKR that they've got to deliver against, right? Actually, this is something that everybody really needs to be bought into.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. It's about embedding it into just business as normal, business as usual. This is what we do around here, and yeah, that's the evolution that we need to see, rather than the responsibility. And I'd say it's also everybody's opportunity.
Perfect, thank you. I have another question about sort of the interlink between equality and D&I. And this is a question from the audience of where do you see equality fitting in D&I as a current scenario?
Can I ask a clarifying question? I'm not sure I quite understood the question. Sorry, but isn't surely equality is the end goal of D&I, isn't it?
Don't know. Is it?
I don't know. I'll be quiet. I'll let somebody else answer.
We start a debate about equality versus equity.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's the piece, because equality is, we all know, you've probably all seen those pictures, right, of the three people trying to look over the fence and, you know, what's equality, what's equity, and so on. If you haven't, I did share them on LinkedIn, so you can have a look. But I think the big thing is, I'm not sure equality is, we will always have different elements that don't create equity for different groups. And equality as a thought is probably, yes, right, I 100% agree. But we know, like, if we say we equally treat everyone, we know that it's not equal treatment that's necessary for a certain thing. Certain groups are disadvantaged due to historical challenges, or there's other barriers in place that need to be addressed. So I think equity is quite important to understand that, because again, I think it probably comes to, or the question is probably phrasing where we say, well, we've created equity in a process and it's automatically fair for everyone. The truth is it can't be, because you've not understood the unique challenges that different groups might face. So by the process being equal doesn't necessarily create that equity into the process, in my opinion. But I do think equality is the end goal, but how we get there, there's numerous different elements.
Yeah. And I just want to build on that, because I think that what this means is, for some people in organizations, a massive mindset shift, because there's an obsession with political correctness and positive discrimination and tokenism, etc. And what we're saying here is exactly, I just love your story about going into EY and going into big build, and this is, you know, for some people very familiar, and for other people this is the most terrifying thing. So how can I do my best work if I'm, you know, don't know how to navigate the building? So this is about, I think, organizations having an open growth mindset to recognizing that we need to help you know, people understand better other people's lived experience, which is why storytelling drives empathy and drives humanity. And we need to make sure that there are targeted what we would call inclusion nudges, using behavioral science and behavioral economics to enable people to you have all the opportunities for them that other people it's just naturally afforded to. How do I network? Yeah, how do I network if you've onboarded me virtually and I've never had a networking experience in my life? You know, I'm an apprentice. How do I do this? We have to help raise people's knowledge and capability through targeted interventions that creates more opportunity. And that's really important. I think people get so obsessed with this is like, you know, political correctness or positive discrimination. No, it's about understanding there are different experiences and other people can benefit from. This is why things like reverse mentoring are an education. Use targeted interventions to help bring everybody up so people can then shine. And that's, you know, my view on it.
I think you've already answered the question that was pending about how does D&I fit into L&D and OD as a field as well, with the behavior economics? So the next question is a bit more of an aspirational one. So you've all been in this field for a while. You've seen the bad, the ugly, some good attempts of organizations doing things. You're doing them yourself, so you know what good looks like in the current market. I want you to think 10 years into the future and think of what are some of the things you want to see as part of D&I 10 years into the future, and what are some of the things you don't want to see into that scenario.
So I'll start on that. I think we're not going to solve the D&I problems. I wish we did, but I know we're not. That's a given. What I'd like to see is more honest conversations within organizations, more honesty from organizations, from leaders and so on, true vulnerability coming through from leaders. I'm sick and tired of looking at annual reports that highlight we've done this, we've achieved that, we did this. No one actually talks about failings. And I think it's important for us to own our failings. No one's looking for you to be perfect. Everyone knows no organization is perfect. But the more we talk about our failings and create that human interaction, I think that's where we'll see true change and true belief that we're making progress, we want to make progress. And human leaders. I really worry about the advancements in technology and how we are moving so away from our human interactions and being human to each other, engaging with each other. We have an answer, a program for everything. Even when I look at some of the work that we do, even in D&I, now there's this, and I'm not against any solution, by the way, but there's solutions for, we can check, CVs for this and that, and we can make sure there's no bias. They are good tools. I do use them myself as well. However, what's more important is the people who work in those departments to understand what bias looks like within those. A program will not, the program will solve one element of it. At some point, there'll be human interaction. Humans need to get it. Humans need to understand and realize what responsibility they have. But I feel we're very good at offshoring our problems, and technology seems to be the thing that will solve our problems, so we don't have to worry about it ourselves.
Absolutely. Definitely agree. I think if I think 10 years into the future, or if I think 10 years into the past, actually, I've noticed myself a trend. Certainly, I mentioned before about how actually I've been sometimes surprised myself that I find I'm pushing at an open door in wanting to be better. And I find that actually I'm not having to convince people in a way I may be expected to. And that's, I think, something that I've really noticed that change. So I hope that in the next 10 years, that will continue to evolve. I hope that in 10 years' time, maybe we'll have moved on from talking about diversity as a tick box problem, as somebody's OKR, to tick off that we've hired, I don't know, 30% women or BAME candidates or whatever. Tick, big old bonus at the end of the year. Well done, you, pat on the back. And actually move beyond that into having a more person-first approach, not what boxes are you ticking on the survey, but actually, what is this person bringing to the business? As you mentioned, culture add, I could talk about it for hours, but actually that approach of not just how does this person fit in with what we have today, but actually what are unique attributes, experience, etc. are they bringing into the business that we don't have already? I've noticed that trend even just in the last couple of years. So I hope that that's something that we'll continue to see more and more.
And I'd say, like, listening to the question and thinking going forward in 10 years' time, what hopefully will happen, more humanization in workplaces where we treat each other as human beings rather than as roles and as status and all of that division. Now, there's probably some kind of humor, and maybe I'm just overfull, but I always say to clients, your success is like, you don't need us anymore. We have made ourselves redundant. But as a 53-year-old woman, I don't think that's coming yet in the next 10 years, because what worries me is polarization, geopolitics, and all of that then impacting on workplaces, and that we've gone backwards in a lot of ways, as well as some of the good stuff that has come out of the pandemic around humanization. But I'm going to end on a positive note. When I talk to people much younger than me, there's a passion, there's a less bias around others, there's much more focus on identity and individualism, and people care about the environment and sustainability, and all of this stuff is inextricably linked with how we treat each other. So the intertwining of EDI and ESG, and hopefully younger people changing the world where we can't. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Sasha. And to that, I would add, I think we need to recognize that every individual and every organization is on a journey, hopefully in the right direction around diversity and inclusion. Obviously, there'll be challenges ahead. We are seeing challenges now with a lot of organizations. So just keep going, show that vulnerability, that you're on a learning platform as well. I'm learning every day, and this session has been opening my eyes around some of the areas that I didn't even know that I need to look into and read more about as well. Some of the recommendations that were made and some of the comments that came from the people in the room as well. So I think it's a learning journey for all of us, and the fact that we're here in this space means that we want to do better, and we want to learn from each other, and we want to support each other on that journey. And we have 3 minutes left for this session. Any final reflections from each one of you?
I'll start. I've learned a lot from both of the fellow panelists, so I'm got good things to take away. I love both of your approach, and I just wanted to thank you for sharing that with me. It's just been great. And for me, I would just say, please don't forget, inclusion is a verb, and that's a doing.
Thank you, Sasha.
I really love that articulation of inclusion as a verb. I've not heard that before, but I love it. I'm going to steal it with pride. Thank you. Yeah, no, massively learned so much. Actually, it's been such a fascinating discussion. A real joy to be, an honor to be part of. I think I noticed, and I'm looking forward to at some point having a bit more time to actually dig through the comments and the chat that I've kind of seen and been trying to not get distracted by. I did notice a comment there around, you know, to stop referring to the diversity problem, which is absolutely right. And I'll hold my hand up, is a trap that I fall into occasionally, and it's a terrible habit. It's not a problem to be solved, actually. It's a real opportunity, I think. And I think that's something that I'm going to reflect on and take away, because I know that that is actually something that I have probably slipped up and said, possibly even tonight, unintentionally, but with connotations that actually I'm not entirely comfortable with.
I guess just from my side, I was going to say, you know, again, I think, you know, diversity is a great opportunity to embrace. But I think one of the things, if there's anything that we should acknowledge as well, is that people are on a journey when it comes to D&I. We need to start valuing, you know, we need to create an environment of psychological safety and learning, and that goes for everyone. We will make mistakes. I work in a global organization where people are translating words from their native language into English. It doesn't always come out right. But what's important is, how do I take them on a journey of learning? And I will always, and I, you know, this is one of the things I hold very dear to myself, that I will always value and look at things or people or individuals with good intent until it's proven to me that the intent wasn't good. I will never go in with that it wasn't good intent. And I think we need to all hold on to that. As much as we know sometimes people do say things, or people will, you know, will have the intent might be negative, but I will hold on to that everyone's a good person and has positive intent, and I'll try to educate them until I'm proven wrong. And I think we must, especially in the work that we do, each and every one of us, it is really important that we continue that learning and we always give the benefit of the doubt.
So thank you very much to each and every one of you. It's been amazing to have you here and hear your stories, your insight, your advice for the present and the future. hats off to you for your amazing contribution, and for everybody else who's attended. For everybody else who's still with us in the room, you should have already received a feedback form if you want to give us any feedback with comments, ratings, whatever you want to do as part of that. We'll welcome that, and it's actually very helpful for us to shape future sessions. If you're still on the line, there are some upcoming sessions that you need to save in your diary. The bookings haven't opened yet for all of them, but it will be in the next few days. And the 24th of March, in the same time frame, we're doing purpose-led organizations. In 28th of April, we're looking at organizational transformation. On the 26th of May, we're looking at employee experience in the context of organizational change. And on the 23rd of June, we're looking at hybrid workplaces, which would be quite an interesting one because a lot of organizations, hopefully by then, across the UK would have moved into a more established framework of the hybrid workplace. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you very much for the speakers that shared with passion their insights on diversity and inclusion and people strategies. And I hope to see you soon.
Thank you for organising. It's been a really great session.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.